have a packed full agenda today, and we really would like to start going. Thank you so much. Good morning and welcome. On behalf of our host, the Permanent Mission of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, and our co-sponsors, including the Permanent Missions of Albania, Canada, and Fiji, the Interparliamentary Union, UN Women, League of Women Voters, PSEWA, ICJW, NGO CSW New York, and FALCO. We are pleased to be here with all of you. The topic of the importance of women in government has been raised by many. You all know the statistics. According to the World Health Organization, 1 out of 3 women have experienced violence in her life. And according to IPU, 44.4% of women in parliaments have been subject to sexual harassment and violent threats, which is a power play to keep women out of government. Cultural misogyny results in poverty, violence, and degradation of women's and girls' human rights. Why is it important to have women in government? From an intuitive basis, it certainly seems that direct representation of more than half of the world's population makes sense. And why is it important to have at least a critical mass and moreover parity of women in government? Again, from an intuitive basis, it certainly makes sense when more women's voices are at the table, the more clearly we will be heard. But today's session will move from the intuitive to the factual. Each of our panelists is a distinguished leader in national government. All have been or are currently serving in Parliament. They will share their personal viewpoints as to what women achieve when they are in government. They will discuss how those achievements translate to not only improving the lives of women and girls, but also leading the gains for all of society. Whether it is an increase in GDP through a better prepared workforce that's been educated and has decision-making responsibilities, or enhancing peace and security, women parliamentarians are impacting all of the SDGs. Further, they will examine why the Interparliamentary Union, UN Women, and many others call for parity. The importance of women's leadership and voices in driving the change needed to ensure that we all have a legal right to our human rights, and to ensure that our legal rights are implemented and enforced by strong institutions that are sustainable. Lastly, we will all have a role to play. We can vote for candidates that do not harass or threaten, that engage in civil debates. We can encourage and support women candidates to run for office. Our panelists will speak to what we can do as members of NGOs, post-CSW, and at the local level throughout all of the regions. We will begin with opening statements of approximately 3 to 5 minutes from each of the panelists. First, we'll hear from Her Excellency Penelope Beckles, our host and permanent representative to the United Nations on behalf of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Ambassador Beckles, prior to becoming the permanent representative, also has served in a number of ministerial posts, as well as senator, leader of opposition business, and its first woman as Deputy Speaker of the Parliament. Ambassador Penelope, please lead us off. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to be part of this panel, but I'm even happier because of the amount of you that are here this morning. It's good to see that the women are out in their numbers. I hope that's an indication that the revolution for change and the increase of women in leadership and power, and that's a good sign. I'm not going to read what I have. I just had some thoughts when I was coming here, and I think I was inspired even more by what I've seen. I want us to remember that next year we celebrate 25 years after Beijing. It gives us the opportunity to reflect and think a lot more about the importance of today's discussion. There are some questions that I wanted to ask, which I think is relevant, and it's 3 minutes, so I mean there are a lot of things I would like to say that I can't say, but I want to ask some questions. We know that gender equality is a critical component of economic growth. As we talk about gender parity, we talk about more women in power, about when we ask ourselves why it is we see that the figures are literally, I mean, we are creeping, we are moving like a tortoise. I'm saying that women make up half of the world's population, and no matter what we say today, the question is, why are we taking so long to get to parity? In Beijing, we talked about 1/3, and I want to just read something very quickly here for you. And this was, okay, and this is from UN Women. It says, a map which presents global rankings for women in the executive and parliamentary government branches as of 1st of January 2019 shows the proportion of women ministers is at an all-time high, 20.7%. 812 out of 3,922, 2.4% higher compared to 2017. The map follows the publication of the IPU analysis of women in parliament last week, which showed that the global share of women members of parliament, 24.3%, has increased by nearly 1 point compared with 2017. The share of women parliamentary speakers increased by 0.6% percentage compared to 19.7, and the deputy speakers increased by 1.6 percentage. However, women representation in top level leadership has increased. 7.2% of elected heads of state to 6.6%, 10 out of 153, and from 5.7% of heads of government to 5.2, 10 out of 193. That's the extent of the importance of this discussion today. IPU President said that equal representation in government positions is fundamental for a democracy to be truly representative and effective. So here are some of my questions. First one, do girls want to be politicians? I mean, have you asked your daughters? Okay, those of you who are in the NGO movements and who are politicians, when you're in a room of girls, 100, you ask them, do you want to be a politician? Okay. Can we convince more girls to enter politics? Can we convince political parties to have quota systems? Can we convince our parliaments to legislate to have more women in power? What's the profile of a politician? Can we convince leaders, managers, Secretary General, the PGA to take decisions to put women in office? There are 40 ambassadors out of the 193. The Secretary General took a decision since he became Secretary General to have parity, and he has succeeded. The President of the General Assembly has appointed 60% women as co-facilitators as compared to 40% men. So that tells you that there are times when persons in decision making can take decisions to put women in power. Now, I am conscious of my time. I just want to give you quickly the profile of a politician. In the American Congress, 169, 38%, 57 senators, law degrees, 19 House doctors. Most of them law, business, and education. In the 113 Congress, 1/5 of the 435 100 senators worked in education as teachers, professors, and school counselors, twice as many business and lawyers. Now let me just come to my ending, because there are other things I want to see. Let us be conscious. Women own less than 20% of the world's land, but half of the world's population is women. 400 million of them farm and produce the majority of the world's food supply, yet more female farmers do not own land. In many countries, daughters do not have equal inheritance rights as sons. 50 to 70% of the world's extreme poor are women. A recent World Bank document states that women represent 40% of the world's labor force, but hold just 1% of the world's wealth. Let me end by saying that the real issue is, let's go back to the Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17. And if it is the countries that have signed on the Sustainable Development Goal, implement those Sustainable Development Goals, the chances are a lot of what we're going to discuss today can happen. So let's look at SDG 5 on gender equality, SDG 10 on reduced inequalities, and SDG 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Penelope. Asking the questions, do you want to be a politician? Politics has become a dirty word in many, many locations. And today we will hear from the Honorable Gabriela Cuevas, who knew that she wanted to serve the public since she was 15 years old. Her focus and commitment to honesty and integrity has enabled her to serve in Mexico's parliament, first as a senator and now in the Chamber of Deputies. She's the chairperson of Foreign Relations Committee, as well as the 29th president of the Inter-Parliamentary Union. Under her leadership with the IPU, it has released a number of timely surveys and studies, including Women in Parliament 2018, the Year in Review, and several on violence against women parliamentarians in 2016 and 2018. And I invite you to attend government at 3 p.m. right back. Also, they have publications in the back. Gabriela, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rosalie, and thank you very much to Ambassador Beckles for being our host. But I must say that since I started receiving Rosalie's emails about organizing this convocation, a very plural space for all of us, I was very excited, because if we start uniting our voices into the same direction, I am absolutely sure that finally we're going to be able to change the world. IPU does a lot of things that I believe are very well done. Of course, I am the president, but especially when it comes to tracking data about women in parliament, our experience is really good. How good? Well, SDGs, in terms of measuring how women are doing in politics, are using IPU data. So yes, we are very, very good about that. And we have done this exercise from decades ago. So our findings are very good, are very clear, and allow me to share with you some of the recent findings. We just released 2 days ago our map. You can find, that Rosalie mentioned, you can find the map just at that part of the room. But what we have seen is, if we measure elections in 2018, we can be kind of optimistic, because the women's in parliament presence increased 0.9%. Kind of optimistic. Because if we go to 2017, the percentage was only 0.1%. It means that in the last 2 years, this presence of women in parliament increased only 1%. It means that we need 50 years to reach parity in parliaments worldwide. Or in other words, we are about to celebrate Beijing plus 25, and we don't have a lot to celebrate when it comes to politics, because in 25 years, the change in the presence of women in parliament was only 13%. In 25 years that we're celebrating and speaking and doing a lot of speeches about the presence of women in parliaments and in politics. If we go to ministerial positions, we now have 20.7% women. And sadly, only 19 heads of state or government are women. How do we change this picture? Events like this can help us to strategize and learn from one another. But most importantly, it can help showcase how women are making a difference when they reach power positions. IPU research shows that when more women are entering in parliament in large numbers, issues such as, I think one of the most important threats, as violence against women, are given priority in legal reforms and also in budget allocations. Women have been at the forefront of cross-party collaboration. When we see that more women are arriving to parliaments, immediately it's like political parties are disappearing because we try to be a single team. And we have to maintain that spirit. Because of course, this pushback that the UN Secretary General is mentioning is applying in dividing women. So we have to be clear that we need to be one single team. When women in position of powers are also challenging gender stereotypes. And that's very good. That's a way that we can change culture, because now girls can have a different perspective. Yes, politics is messy, almost yes, a dirty word, but when women are arriving to politics, I am sure that we're doing a huge difference. Now the picture is different. Now the perspective and dreams for little girls can be also different. So that's one of the commitments that we have to be clear, that whatever we do, we can be a good example and an inspiring person for young girls, because they are the ones that are truly going to change this world. Well, we, as Rosalie mentioned, we are developing a lot of different studies at IPU, and one of the recent ones, we started a survey with our female MPs about violence in Parliament. And then we went deeper with the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe and seeing also what was happening specifically in Europe. And I was very surprised, and I believe that many of you that already saw these conclusions, we thought that the world was better for women in terms of making parliaments, or at least small buildings, safer for women. And they are not. 4 out of every 5 women in parliament felt violence in different ways. In some cases it was about verbal or psychological violence, but we have heard terrible, terrible stories saying how they suffered when they were campaigning, but also being sexually harassed in parliaments. And that goes for MPs, and that goes also for staffers and our teams. So we need to make real changes, and that goes from our basic institutions. A parliament should be a safe space for women, MPs, staff, visitors, etc. But also we need to understand that if this is happening to MPs, what is going on in the streets? What is going on within the families? A man is not violent only because they became to politics. That's part of the society that we need to change, and that's why we need to change the numbers of women in parliament. Having 75% male parliamentarians is not okay. Our societies are in parity. Almost we can say that women are more persons in this world than men. But let's say that we're 50-50. We should go and fight for gender quotas. My last comment, if we see the list, you can see our map, but if we go to the list and see the 10 countries that are having more presence of women in parliaments, 8 of them are having legal quotas or partisan quotas. So cultural change is not going to happen suddenly, ladies. We need to change our laws. Thank you very much, Rosalie and Ambassador Beckles, for this leadership.
Parliamentarians setting a good example and inspiring girls. We've come to our next panelist, who certainly embodies that comment. Dear Marasini, welcome back to our panel. Honorable Marasini Vinawaka was with us last year in our side event panel series of Women in Government. In addition to her responsibilities as a member of Parliament, she currently serves as the Minister of Women, Children, and Poverty Alleviation. She has previously served in government as the State Solicitor for Fiji's Office of the Attorney General, Chair of the Telecommunications Authority, and as Permanent Secretary for Justice and Acting Supervisor of Elections. Marasini, please provide us with an insight to Fiji's situation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak on this very important topic. We've heard the numbers from the President of IPU in relation to the participation of women in Parliament. We are not nearly there. So what can we do as a Parliament, as parliamentarians, if we are to push forward matters that matter to us? In Fiji, I'll give you the Fijian experience. We have in the standing orders a provision which mandates every standing committee to do a gender assessment of every paper that comes into Parliament. So every parliamentary paper that comes before us for debate, there is a gender assessment that comes with it. So if we don't have the numbers, these are mechanisms that can be put into parliamentary procedures which mandates the taking into consideration of matters that matter to us. Fiji now boasts of the highest number ever of women parliamentarians in Parliament, and that's 10 out of 51. That happens to be the highest in the Pacific as well. Out of the 14 countries we have in the Pacific, there are 2 countries that don't have any women parliamentarians. And that is a story that needs to be changed. So what are the factors, in my opinion, that does affect women's participation in the political sphere? In Fiji, we also had our first woman speaker who sadly passed away in December last year. She was a champion for matters to do with equality and the empowerment of women in the political sphere. And this is something that women in leadership within the parliamentary space can do, picking up women within the parliamentary space and pushing them forward into matters so that the whole country, so that young girls can see them standing there and speaking on matters to do with the state. In Fiji, we have a patriarchal society, and culture plays a very strong role in our lives. If we were to go back, we have 2 newspapers back home. Last week, because of International Women's Day, there was a lot of articles in relation to empowerment of women and gender equality running in the papers. And one of those articles had to do with one of our female parliamentarians who spoke about how culture impacted on her as a member of Parliament. She happens to be part of a party that sits on a platform of indigenous rights. And this is a lady who she describes herself as a modern woman. And because of that, she did not fit into what her political party stood for. And she talked about how being not a chief in the traditional system impacted on her role as a woman parliamentarian in the party that she belonged to. These are factors that can affect women in Parliament. We had heard from the introduction about cultural misogyny, and these are the realities for certain societies, and Fiji is one of those. So yes, there are a lot of factors that can affect women from standing up and putting their hand up to join parliament. And one of them I'd like to highlight here as well is the role of the media. The role of the media in relation to the highlighting of issues that women parliamentarians bring up in the House. In my experience, I joined Parliament in 2014 after a general election, and I found that when it came to women, the portrayal of women parliamentarians by the media, they were mostly talking about what we wore than what we talked about in Parliament. So it's important as women parliamentarians to call this out. And we did that in the House. We spoke about that, and this was after one of the newspapers came up with a whole page with the heading, House of Fashion. House of Fashion. And it carried pictures of women parliamentarians on a particular day, what we were wearing. So we called it out in the House. So the next 2 days later, they ran another piece with a man this time. So I think as women parliamentarians, women in leadership, it's important to call out these matters when they do appear. And I believe that the role of the media has a very important role to play. They, in every space, they can influence mindsets, they can influence attitudes. So yes, we all have a role to play, but there are some roles that are more important than others, and I believe that media is one of them. Cultural mindsets, culture, that's a hard one, but I believe with the level of awareness raising, it can shift. That can shift as well. And what are we doing about it? As a Minister for Women, we carry out gender sensitization programs for our parliamentarians back home. It's a program that we run for every parliamentarian, and I hope that it can make a change. Well, I'm comforted by the numbers that we're increasing. We're not there yet, but at least for every election, I hope to see an increase in the numbers of women parliamentarians. Thank you.
Thank you, Maricini, for bringing in the concept that everyone has a role to play, including the media. It's a very important concept to get across. Next, we will hear from the Honorable Margaret Mensah Williams, who currently serves as Chairperson and Deputy Speaker of the National Council of Namibia. Chairperson. And Speaker. My apologies.
No problem.
She is the first woman, okay, in history of the country to hold this post. She was probably the first woman And you also currently serve as Vice President of the IPU's Women's Coordinating Committee? Or President now?
No, I'm the former president. For 4 years I held the president position.
Okay. Well, we're going to just move
Well,
to the rest.
I can say, if I may, Rosalie,
Yes.
that Margaret was the president of our Women's Parliamentary Forum, but also now she's the first non-European president of the Parliamentary Committee for WTO. So she's now mixing gender and finance in a very good way.
I just want to say, though, also that you are an active advocate for various issues, such as gender equality, violence against women and children, human trafficking, and community development. Margaret, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, moderator, and thank you very much. I'm very humble. Thank you, President of the IPU. Good morning, beautiful ladies and gentlemen. The room is so warm because of you. Well, I listened to very powerful presentations from the previous panelists, and I have the following to say. Do we know what power lies within us to actually create this critical mass? To create gender equality, not only parity, as women with support of men. We can, if we have women and men who are action-driven, and not only speaking. We don't walk the talk sometimes. Sometimes we come here with vocabularies at CSW and we try to impress each other. But basically at home, what are we doing to impact on the lives of other women and young people? I've heard the question, does young women want to be in parliament? They cannot be in parliament if we don't enable them by also establishing nurseries at parliament. Where should they leave their children? So we want to create a parliament where we are mentoring young people, where we are also including them by ensuring that we have all access for them to take care of their children while they are spending hours and hours in parliament. It can't be only for Margaret, who is already over 50, looking at 60. This is the time we have to start giving over. I think after 22 years, I've decided within the next year, by next year, December, I'm going to give over to a younger woman. And we need to support each other. Women are the biggest constituency of one another. Then, in Namibia, I always, when I look at the critical mass and issues of parity, I am reminded of what the female former African Union Commission chairperson said, Madam Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, and she said, and I quote, "Having one woman who made it in a man's world is not enough. We need a critical mass of women and gender parity to change it into the humane world." End of quote. So, how humane is our world? When I speak to heads of states and I get the opportunity within the IPU, because the IPU opens the world. The statistics and the data of IPU speaks of relevance. It influences. I must thank the president of the IPU. She is a hands-on president. She travels the world, she doesn't rest, because she believes that this world needs women to be in charge of the economy. Women need to make a difference, because only then can we reduce poverty. Only then can we give opportunities. Only then can we have good health benefits for women. Only then can we stop the torture. Only then can we stop rape, abuse, sexual abuse. Only then can we stop children and women being used as slaves of war, sexual slaves of war. And I don't want to go into a lot of statistics, but I just want to say the country I come from, and I call it the shine and the smile of Africa, Namibia, ranked 38 in the Gender Gap Index of 2006, and that we are 7th in the Global Gap Index, and also that 46% of seats in Namibia in the bicameral parliament are held by women, and that women outperformed the global average of 24% in Namibia. Now, I want to go further and say, what does women bring to the table? What do we bring in parliament? Yes, in Namibia, with our gender ministry, with NGOs, with all like-minded men and women, we brought forth the Married Persons Equality Act, the Combating of Rape Act, the Maintenance Act, the Combating of Domestic Violence Act, the Child Care and Protection Act, which with all the instruments that was and policies that was finalized, started in action last week. And when it comes to land, we are guaranteeing land women to have property owners, to be property owners, and the inheritance of the Communal Land Reform Act, we changed it in order for women to also inherit, because in Africa we have a challenge with culture, the so-called culture, which is male culture, not the culture of the country or of the continent. Then women get preference in the resettlement program, because we have willing buyer, willing seller. We don't grab land. Within that, women get preference to own land. Now, I also want to give an opportunity to you to ask questions. However, let me come back to a little bit of what I want to speak about. We have debates in Parliament. We concentrate and we debate as women, because the Women Caucus, we ensured that it became a standing committee. It gets a budget. We are operationalized. We put action to talk. And because of that, we change issues, notably like the social and development issues, the quality of social services. We look at human rights, we are inclusive, we go to prisons and look if, for instance, we are ensuring that people are adhering to the human rights. We look in the country, we are the first country to sign the optional protocol of CEDAW, and we have to utilize that worldwide. So let me conclude by saying, within the Namibian Parliament, we change the way people debate. We have gender-responsive budgeting, not all over, but we are having oversight and ensuring that that should happen. We are looking at the budget, and luckily, in our country, we have a head of state and government that puts health first, education first. 62% of graduates are young women. We don't want to reverse, we want to encourage boy children too. So, as members of parliament, we need to look at what are the issues we can work with NGOs. Let them advocate with us. We have the 50-50. Let us look into electoral laws. But in all, we need fearless women. I was the first deputy speaker, female deputy speaker, as the facilitator just said. I am the first speaker, as the facilitator said. It was not easy. One day I was asked in Parliament, and they tried to intimidate me when I just entered, with whom did you sleep to get the position? Oh. Well, at the time, we were only 2 women in the Senate or the upper house. And I stood in Parliament and I said, well, if you say you have to sleep with a man to get a position, all you men, it means you slept with men. That's why you have the position. So sometimes it doesn't sit within you because of culture. We start speaking about sexual intercourse. We start talking about issues that is deriving with issues of talking about sex, sexuality. It makes people uncomfortable, but some of us have to do it. So let's walk the talk. Let's push back the pushback, and let's balance. Behave. Let's go. Bye-bye.
Margaret, thank you so much. Action-driven, is that not action-driven? Marvelous, just marvelous. Our next panelist, the Honorable Hannah Berner Christian Doctor, previously served as a member of Althing, which is Iceland's parliament, and as Minister of the Interior. She also understands governments at the local level, serving on both the City Council and as the Mayor of Reykjavik. She is currently she is currently Senior Advisor on Women's Leadership at UN Women, and has also worked as Chair of the Executive Board of Women Political Leaders, the Global Forum. Hannah, we look forward to your insights.
Thank you so much, and thanks to the host of this event. How is one supposed to follow in the steps of the one that's doing? I mean, if we are talking about just basically what we need this. So let me just start with this. But as was mentioned in the introduction, my name is Hanna Birna Kristjánsdóttir. You're not expected to pronounce that name just now. But in my former life, I was a politician. I was active in Icelandic politics for 20 years. Then entered sort of the international scene of gender equality via Women Political Leaders, which is a network of parliamentarians around the world, women. And now I have the honor of serving UN Women, which I've been following, of course, closely as a feminist ever since I was really young, although they were not funded until later, the identity itself. And I'm pleased and honored to be there. I'm thinking about, we've listened to the issues here, and again, I would like to say thank you to IPU for constantly making sure that we have the figures in place. Because if there is one thing, and that is what is seen with UN Women as well, we have been making sure that we keep the facts and figures in place. If there is something we need to constantly point out, if there is a problem, I mean, we even have discussions in some places, if there is a problem, the numbers do matter. And the fact that there are only 24% of parliamentarians around the world, don't forget that number, that are women, the rest is men. And when it comes to heads of states, we are only 6%, meaning that 94% of heads of states are men. And then some people are asking, do we really need to do something? Fairly obvious. And if you look at the CEO of the world, I mean, in the biggest and the largest companies, women are 5%. So I think we need to sort of push that from the tables. The figures are, they show the facts, and it needs to be tackled. But what can we do? How can we deal with this? At UN Women, we have been pointed out several matters that can be done. I mean, if we're talking about parliaments, we still live in a world where only 6 parliaments, 6 countries in the world make sure that the laws that are in place are equal towards men and women. And this is 2019. And this is a report that was published by World Bank only this month. It shows that only 6 countries have done that. Not even my home country, which has been #1 when it comes to gender equality for 10 years, has managed to do that. So this is a task that needs to be done. I mean, women cannot thrive in a society where the law does not see them as equal. So that would, for me, be the first thing, and that is what we have been pointing out at UN Women for a long time. Another thing that can be done is making sure that the laws consider gender equality, meaning that we take steps when it comes to progressive legislation. My home country has done several things on that, and I would like to share with you that this can be done, because people say, how can this be done? I mean, in Iceland this was done via political lines, meaning that there was a consensus on the big issues, such as trying to make sure that there is equal pay, such as trying to manage the paternity leave in such a way that men can take care of their children as well as women. This was all done via consensus on the political side, meaning that women that were active in politics took sort of formed a bond on making sure this would happen. This is why networks for women are so important. And we sometimes, when I was in politics, I tried my best to make sure that I would work with women from around the spectrum on these issues, because it matters. To try and change the really, really harmful traditional ways of looking at what a man should do and what a woman can do. And I have sometimes said, just to put this into context, I don't think the world will really have changed when it comes to gender equality until our kids will wake up in middle of the night feeling not too well, and they are as likely to shout out for their father as they are for their mother.
Yes.
That's when things start to change. And this is I say this because this is the reality I have experienced myself, having 2 children, 2 daughters. They are as likely to call out for their father as they are to call out for me, because he took as long leave to take care of them, and he does as much in the household as I do. So they are as likely to cry out for him. And when that has been done, many other things have changed. Also, when we here in the room and everybody else in the world close their eyes and think about power, and not instantly see a middle-aged white man dressed up in suits with a deep voice, then we have also reached gender equality. Because there is this recent study, it was a research done in the G7 countries. It was to try and find out the perception of the general public when it comes to power and gender. And we are at a bad state. I mean, even in these countries, there is still the traditional view of, for example, a politician should be a middle-aged man, a CEO should be a middle-aged man, but women can lead when it comes to, it's a wide sort of survey of all kinds of industries. The general public is okay with us when we are leading in education, when we are leading in beauty, when we are leading in healthcare. These are sort of, when they close their eyes and think about leaders in this category, they are okay with women. But when it is with the other issues, they prefer men. So we're still at that stage, and this needs to be changed, and this can only be changed, I think, via facts and figure, via us constantly speaking out, joining forces, not only the parliamentarians themselves, not only the institutional organizations such as UN, but the general public, and women making sure that they are heard. So that's when I think things will start to change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. that we were going to put two panelists and just a couple, and we're going to split it up a little bit because we're running short on time, and I would like to get to questions from some of the members of the audience. Okay. I was going to ask these questions first, but if you'd like to ask the questions, go ahead. Thank you.
Hello, I am Senator Sasi Palishu. I represent Pakistan. I must say that I was really touched by all these amazing speeches made by these wonderful ladies and politicians. I would like to endorse Madam Margaret's views regarding child nurseries, that government must establish daycare centers at parliaments as well, and we are working on it. Pakistan has just passed a bill, regarding childcare center. Just a couple of lines. Compared to the past, in Pakistan there has been increase in the proportion of women to have been elected to legislative bodies, mainly because of the quota that allocates seats specifically to women. But a higher proportion of women are contesting elections for legislative bodies to general seats as well. I just would like to know that how do you look at quota system or reserve seats? Because systems varies, situations vary in different societies and different countries. But you must have talked about it, but I would like to ask these panelists. Thank you very much.
Okay. I think at this point, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask the questions that we have here so that we cover it. And then if there is a couple of minutes, we will ask one or two more questions. It's really packed, as you can see. The first questions that we really want to focus on are the accomplishments when women are in government or parliament or parliamentary leaders. As Margaret was mentioning, the whys of what women bring to the table really can be exemplified by our panelists in the room. And I was hoping that, Maricini, you could lead us off in talking about some of the accomplishments in Fiji, specific accomplishments when women are at the table in leadership roles.
Thank you. Thank you. We all know that as women, we bring a different perspective to every topic. And therein lies the merit of having women sit at the table, being part of the decision that's been made in parliaments. But not only that, we also have, because of the numbers that we have a majority of men in our parliament. It's also very important as women parliamentarians to be able to influence men who are already in power, the majority of the House, to prioritize matters that matter to us. And in Fiji, I'd just like to give an example. On International Women's Day last year, as a House, because we had the majority in Parliament, we were able to pass a law that removed I hope, the final prohibition against women from working in a certain sector in the economy. And this was to do with women working in underground mines. We were a colony, and we inherited a lot of our laws from the British Empire at the time. And one of those laws, I hope it's the last one that we have in our laws, that prohibited women from working in underground mines. And this is despite the fact that we had amazing women coming out with qualifications to work as geologists and scientists, but they couldn't work in that particular field because of this particular law. So because of the numbers that we have, we're 10 out of 51. Apart from influencing the matters that come to the table, it's also important to influence the minds of the majority, the men in Parliament, so that you can push your agenda forward. So yes, that's the Fijian experience, and apart from that, gender-sensitized leadership is very important. As a country, we've only introduced laws in relation to domestic violence, for example, in 2009. We've increased the marital age to 18 in 2012. Child Welfare Act, Disability Act in 2018. All matters that women would consider as critical in the governance of an economy. But because we don't have the numbers, we wouldn't be able to do it as women, but we're able to influence the men in power to be able to make these decisions. Thank you.
Very important, a very important factor. Thank you. Also, Penelope, your current role as the permanent representative for Trinidad and Tobago, as well as your previous roles, you're in a unique position to work not only on the national level, but also on the international. Can you talk about some of those priorities and how, as a woman, you've been able to intersect the main concerns internationally and nationally and accomplishments?
Okay, thank you very much. I'd just like to say that as of January this year, I now have the additional responsibility of being president of UN Women. So that gives me the opportunity to not only just have some priorities, but hopefully to influence change. I'd just like to quickly just say a couple of things about my country. At present, the President of the Senate, the Speaker of the House, the Leader of the Opposition, and we now have for the first time an elected President of our country, which is this year would be 1 year since she's been elected. I think some of the important things in Trinidad and Tobago is the issue of education. I mean, education has been free for quite a long time. Now that we have economic challenges, it means that that policy is not in place as it used to be, but free tertiary, secondary education, and in many instances, scholarships for those who have done very well. The University of the Western Indies, which is our main faculty, in every single faculty, women dominate except the engineering faculty. And in some faculties like law, there are as much as 60% of women doing law. So a lot has to do with the education policies. We know that there are 130 million girls that are not in school. I come back again to the importance of the SDGs, and I challenge the women who are in this room to know about the 17 SDGs, to go back to your respective countries, know about them. I mean, my focus, my passion has always been to increase women's participation in politics. I think health issues relating to health in cities are very important. And for us in small island developing states, the issue of women and climate change, because we are very often affected by natural disasters. And the last one for me would be, last two would be women in sports, because I think that influences women's role in terms of leadership. And for us, peace and security, we are a small island developing state, and we have been impacted negatively by small arms and some other issues related to crime. Thank you.
Thank you. Margaret.
Can you point to well, you already did,
The laws that have been able to be passed as a result of women being there. Is there any other maybe subtle impact of the changes that you've been able to make as a result of being in government and from an influence perspective and changing the misogyny culture?
Yes. Thank you very much. Let me say that 2 of the top positions are occupied by women, and that is due to our advocacy, our working together. We move from party politics to the objective of having women making the changes. So what does it mean? The Prime Minister is a woman. Every second week she chairs cabinet, where they take the substantive issues into account to take decisions. We influence members of parliament who are female and who are ministers. We have increased in the health sector, like we have projects within government and with NGOs, and some, like one in my constituency, assisting girls on issues of sanitary pads. Because in Africa, many girls, they drop out of school because they don't have any sanitary pads to wear. And I think these are things, topics we bring to the table, topics we talk about. topics we engage male about, and then eventually it came down to taking decisions on these important issues for the future of these women. Thank you. And girls.
Thank you very much. So we're hearing about the importance of NGOs working hand in hand with governments to solve some of these issues. We're going to move on to our second series of questions, and we will ask the panelists to also cover the quota systems. Is there another question? Are there other questions that can be? The man in the back raising his hand. Yes.
Yes, thank you. Exactly on the issue of quotas, because I agree with Gabriela that we need legally mandated quotas across the board. I come from Iceland, I'm a member of parliament there, and we are doing okay when it comes to critical mass. We have 38% representation in parliament, but that hides the fact that some parties have almost no women. So within those parliamentary groups, we don't have any critical mass. And because of that, some committees have very few women. So after the last elections, the budget committee had 1 woman out of 9, and the education committee, which also deals with equality issues, had 2 women out of 9 members. So this is something that we in Iceland haven't been able to address with the voluntary quota system we have. I think we need to take a step further and just admit that legally binding quotas for all parties are what we need, like Mexico has implemented with great success.
Okay, one more question right here.
Thank you. I'm Swani Srivechapan, Member of Parliament from Thailand. And thank you very much for very useful information from all panelists. I have the first question may related to quota system. I just would like to have opinion or information from all the panelists, if you can. When we're gonna try to implement the quota system in our country, because most of the people working on the women issue have been tried a lot. I believe that most of the country that be able to achieve on this, the women have to be tried to put this kind of quota system in the constitution as well. I would like to know how you overcome the resistance or objection from, I don't thought that is a man, even though for women, the objection to put this kind of quota system in the constitution. Because one of the reasons of the people who not support this saying that currently both men or women, they can run the politics without any restriction. It's a fair play. If you run for a politics and then the voter elect you, then you can be a politician. Why you need a quota system? Because at the moment there is no restriction that not allow women to run politics. So that is the first question that I need to know, how you achieve the overcome on those objections from the people who really don't support for this kind of thing. Secondly, maybe related to the first question, because people who not agree saying that most of the population in most countries, the voter is female. So if female run as a politician, then and the voter who is female elect woman as a politician, then you can become a politician. And why? The big question that why women who be the voter, majority, most of them not select women to be a politician. So I thought that might be two dilemma that if we be able to overcome that, we can achieve whatever we need, the increasing of the politician in the parliament. Thank you.
Okay, that's going to be it for the questions at this point. Our second series of questions, and we will include the quota systems and the objections, overcoming the objections, and your last point. Also, how has having women in government and parliament changed the dynamics of how business is done? So these quota systems are an important concept of having sufficient numbers of women in government. Gabriela, as president of the IPU and as a member of the Mexican parliament, you are seeing firsthand how the dynamics are changing and the importance of achieving parity. Can you give us some insight on both the personal level and what IPU's surveys and studies have found, including on quotas?
Thank you very much, Rosalie. And well, actually, speaking a little bit about my own experience can be a good insight of the history of quotas and all these changes in my country. Allow me to say that, first of all, I feel very proud to be in the Americas region because we have the highest percentage of women in parliament. That is above 30%. And it has to do a lot that we started having gender quotas since the 90s. The second part is that my country now is having, for the very first time, the first Senate and the first Congress with, we can say, parity. It's like 49%, so almost parity, so we are very happy in Mexico. And this started a long time ago. That's why we came here. It's not something that happened from one day to another. I started in politics when I was 15 years old. So I started almost as a girl, an adolescent, and also as a woman. And it was not easy in any of both sides. As for youth and gender, it was both complicated. Then at 21, that was the time I started as a member of parliament. I was the youngest MP in Mexico, and that was the first legislature when we started talking about affirmative action and gender quotas. The first challenge was to decide whether it was better to have it in the electoral law or in the Constitution. So part of the deal was to have it at first at the electoral law, but of course it started growing and we had to make a lot of changes and amendments to that law because of course a lot of men and political parties try to cheat. They try to have, for example, in Mexico you vote for a person, but also in a formula for a substitution in case the person who is entitled to the seat dies or resigns or whatever, you have a substitution elected by the people. So some parties and some men, what decided is to have like for the accomplishing the quota, to have a woman, but then for the substitution a man. And a lot of women were forced to resign when this first generation came. So then we changed the law. So we have been changing and improving our own legislation. So the final amendment that, and I believe that's going to stay there for a very long time, is at constitutional level, parity, 50% for each gender. And when you establish this formula, it has to be a women's formula or men's formula, but you cannot mix, and that's a way to avoid evil temptations for men. So that's the way that in Mexico, after 20 years almost, we finally reach a good legislation. I also believe that when we are arriving to power positions as member of parliament, senators, mayor, I was mayor of one part of Mexico City, that's my hometown, a small place of 500,000 population. I was only 27 years old. And one of the things that I was really committed is to change policy. Because sometimes we are seeing, mostly as parliamentarians, in terms of legislation and budget, which is part of our mandate as the parliamentarians. But if we are able to go to another power positions, like to the executive branch or to the judiciary, we have to be clear that whatever we do has a gender perspective. So as a mayor, for example, I decided to make, and that's one of the things that you were talking, a better infrastructure for women, daycare facilities, safe schools with a full day schedule, buses specialized for women, especially designed subsidies for women. So we need to understand that there's a commitment. We are here not for free. This seat has been borrowed for us. There was a lot of women fighting before us, and now we are mandated to open a new path an easier way for girls and adolescents. And whatever we do from NGOs, civil society, business, politics, please remember that we have that commitment.
Oh, yes.
And quickly, we're running out of time here, and I really would like to get to the last part of the session. Insights on the numbers and quota systems, if you could.
Yeah, I think obviously this is one of the routes that UN Women has been advising for countries to take, but that is of course their own decision. I think what is hard about the quotas, now I'm talking more from sort of my personal experience than anything else, there is this difference in the views of women when it comes to this, and it's based a lot on age and experience. When I was younger, I thought that quotas would not be sort of the way to go, because I felt that this was sort of saying that I should take a special route or needed a special assistance. But when we have then grown into being a woman in society, feeling again and again that we don't have the same opportunities, we of course tend to become impatient about the whole thing. And that is why quota system has obviously worked for many of those that have tried that. I would like to mention one thing just in the end, because just a food for thought. We are constantly asking ourselves and having meetings and events like this great one, where we're saying why we should be there. We are trying to explain via numbers. We are trying to explain via facts. We know that countries will be better if there is gender equality. We know that the economy will grow faster. We know that people are happier, and if that isn't enough, men live longer in societies where there is gender equality. So if that's not enough, I think it's good for us to sometimes reflect on the fact that we should have this power. It's sort of our birthright. We are half of population, but we're constantly explaining why. And saying we can be an extra value, we are good in this. Of course we are. I mean, who would ever say a man can actually do good things in society? Yes, of course they can, they're half of the population. So I think we should sometimes sort of see it as our entitled right. I know we have to explain it, but sometimes when you're over 50, as I have turned, you sometimes want to flip the question and say, why should we explain this? I mean, isn't it fairly obvious? It's 50-50, so let's face it.
It's been a very exciting panel, and I want to thank each of our panelists, our organizers, and our audience for coming today. And before we close, because there's going to be a little bit more here, I would like to remind the audience, especially those that are members of NGOs, that our work doesn't end with just listening to our panelists. As Penelope said at the beginning, how can we accelerate this change? Each and every one of us has a role to play. At an event on Tuesday, IPU represented its findings regarding violence against women parliamentarians in Europe. An astonishing 85.2% of female MPs who took part in the study said they had suffered psychological violence in the course of their term of office, and 46.9% had received death threats and threats of rape or beating. All of the panelists that spoke at the event were either leaders of governments and/or at the United Nations, and each provided insights and recommendations on how to overcome the challenge. Yet civil society, and especially NGOs that are represented here today, have a role to play as well. As organizers, we can insist that candidates not engage in harassment or threats, which are the precursors to violence against sitting politicians. The League of Women Voters UN Observers have developed the pledge, which is not copyrighted and can be shared with all here, for any candidate on any level. And as voters, we can enforce the pledge to not engage in harassment or threats by voting for those candidates that use civil discourse in addressing the issues rather than personal attacks. From each of our panelists, and we'll start with Hannah, we'll just go right through the line here. Can you provide your thoughts and suggestions on how we in civil society, and especially NGOs, can support the important work that you're doing as members of government and as either candidates or how we can support your efforts. Hannah?
Thank you so much, and again, thanks for having me. I think it's really obvious. I mentioned that in the beginning, and I think that goes to all of us, and that most certainly goes when it comes to UN Women, which is of course working in most countries. So I think what is mostly important here is that we do what we are constantly doing. We speak out, and we make sure that we are heard. The only thing, of course, is that, and what we are experiencing, for example, here at CSW, and I greatly appreciate how UN Women and how UN is sort of tackling that, is that, I mean, we've had successes in the past, but we're having this great anniversary of many of our greatest success next year, and we need to make sure that we don't just sit and look at the successes, but make sure that we also see, I don't want to call it failures, but there are setbacks. There are things that need to happen way faster. So I think we need to use that opportunity that 2020 gives us to not just reflect on what we have done well, but also on what we can do better. And there is, if we are not going to wait, this will obviously not seem to be happening in our lifetime. It might not even happen in the lifetime of our children. That is, that we will see gender equality worldwide. But if we want to try and strive for that, we need to take a faster route. And that needs to be done also, not only, I mean, for example, in this room, I would just like to mention this because this is what UN Women has been doing greatly, is we need to make sure that rooms discussing this are not only 90% women. That men see this, they must start to see the invested interest they have there. And the debate is too much around women taking things from men. Can't men try and figure out that this is a gain, win-win for them? I mean, how can it not be that the greatest sort of achievements in your life, which must be around family and your personal life, that you will be able to be better involved in that? So we must sort of make sure that the men see the gain in this, because otherwise we will not succeed. We have done this via He4C, but it must be exactly what was said here earlier. They can.
Thank you very much. I would just like to add and say thank you very much for having me. And I want to speak to my sisters and brothers from civil society. 1995, I have been part of civil society. Let's stop the you and us. Let it be us. We need you. You need us. They say alone you can go faster, but together you can go further. So we want to go further. And this debate don't need to be a debate only. Men, we need you. We need to include men in our decisions. We need to include men in our education. In Namibia, we have the Rural Women's Parliament with men as partners. These are all support. So let us support one another. Let's support UN Women. And may we move from here just stronger. Thank you very much.
30 seconds to the left, Gabriela.
NGOs, continue setting agenda, and please, please, please join politics. It's not a dirty word.
Thank you. Apart from supporting government, I think it's important to provide a platform for NGOs to be able to create a strong partnership with governments.
Yes.
We do that in Fiji, and it's government, I believe, that needs to take that first step and provide that platform for NGOs to partner with us.
Thank you. And Penelope?
Yeah, just very quickly, we run the homes, we bear the children, we farm the land. It's time for us to rule the world. Thank you.